Number 8. Sally's Lucky Escape. Thailand is one of the wildest places to have a fun night out, the guys over at The Hangover told us, but their advice falls on deaf ears to the tourists from New Zealand. In 2016, a family night out turned into a nightmare. A woman, Sally, accompanied by her fiance's sister, and a cousin were out in a pub in Phuket. It was around 9 p.m. when a Russian couple approached the family and offered to buy them drinks. They seemed nice and friendly, so Sally and her group let it happen. After a bit of chit-chat, Sally and her fiance's sister decided to go for a dance and were accompanied by the Russian blonde woman, where she bought them a drink. The Russian woman told the girls that the boys had moved the party to a pub across the road and they should go there too. The tourists from New Zealand didn't think at the time to look and check, so they followed the Russian lady, who introduced the sisters to a couple of Albanian guys who were also drinking. That is the last memory Sally herself has of the night. What transpired later on was a lot crazier than the Hangover writers could ever guess. The Russian lady came back to the first pub where the fiancé and cousin were. The Russian couple warned Sally's fiancé that if he ever wanted to meet his wife-to-be again, he should come with them. The man quickly shook them off, concerned and flustered, as he searched for the girls and went all the way back to the hotel. He alerted the police and the management of the hotel, and then decided to search for the girls back near the first pub. A few streets away from the pub, by luck, he spotted a brunette girl being pushed into a taxi. He recognized this to be his sister and ran to the taxi and found his fiancée unconscious in the back seat. If the fiancé hadn't gotten there when he did, he probably never would have seen his bride-to-be again. To this day, Sally remains convinced that her drink was spiked and it was an attempt at human trafficking. Number 7. Pretty Woman. After a night of partying, a man in Fort Lauderdale, Florida was robbed by his date. The victim had been identified only as Eddie, and he says that he was out with his friends along the Los Olas Boulevard when they stopped in the Piazza Italia. When they went into the bar, Eddie saw a pretty woman sitting near the counter. He decided to shoot his shot and struck up a conversation with her. She told him that she had just come from Los Angeles and that she was staying with her 3 kids at a hotel. After some laughs and discussion, Eddie was getting extremely excited. At some point, he went to the ATM to take out money, but that was when everything went really wrong. He took the woman back to his place, she asked for a drink, Eddie made 2, and then he got dizzy. Like, really dizzy. He was still conscious, but he definitely felt disoriented. He realized his date was starting to act bizarre. She stormed out of his house, and Eddie fell asleep. When he woke up, his phone and wallet were gone. So was $6,000 from his bank account. Eddie is hopeful the woman will soon be apprehended. When she took his phone, she took a picture of her face, and this picture saved Eddie's iCloud, which he has access to through his iPad. He gave the police her picture and hopes they will catch her soon. Number 6. Orlando nightclub shooting. The Orlando nightclub shooting was one of the deadliest attacks in the history of the United States, sending shockwaves all across the country. Pulse, an Orlando dance club, established itself as one of the most lively centers for the LGBTQ social life in Central Florida. On that tragic night in 2016, as people geared up for Latin night somewhere nearby, a 29-year-old psychopath named Omar Mateen drove around in a rental van looking for a target. It was around 2 a.m. and last call for drinks. Over 300 people were present in the club when Omar decided Pulse would be his mark. Armed with an assault rifle and a pistol, Omar entered the club and began shooting at patrons. It was absolute chaos and a deadly massacre that killed 49 people and injured at least 53 more. After a standoff that lasted about 3 hours, while people trapped inside the club desperately called and messaged friends and relatives, police crashed into the building with an armored vehicle and used stun grenades to kill Mateen. According to U.S. officials, during the attack, Mateen called 911 to pledge allegiance to ISIS and mentioned the Boston Marathon bombers. The FBI deemed Omar Mateen a, quote, person of interest in May 2013 and opened a preliminary investigation against him 3 years before the incident took place. But in 2014, the investigation was closed and Mateen was deemed, quote, not a threat. The motive of the killer was a point of much debate in the aftermath of the attack, with earlier suggestions being that it was a hate crime attack against the LGBTQ community. However, after the investigation, it was credibly proven that the attack was a randomly chosen nightclub, and the killer, quote, probably didn't even know it was a gay club, and the motive was revenge on the United States. Number 5. The Party Bus. Taking a party bus around the city seems like an awesome way to celebrate a birthday. Unfortunately, for a group of teenagers, what should have been a fun time turned into a bloodbath. Gunmen fired roughly 70 rounds through the windows of the party bus as it drove down an Oakland freeway in May of 2021. The shooting killed 2 teenagers and wounded 5 others. It was close to midnight when the attack occurred. At the time, the bus was carrying over a dozen women back to Oakland from where they had been partying in San Francisco. The group was celebrating the 21st birthday of one of their friends. But what's really insane is that the shooters actually followed the bus all the way off the interstate and into the city streets. There were at least 2 shooters unloading bullets, following the bus everywhere it went. Luckily, the bus driver knew where the nearest police station was and drove his bus straight into the parking lot. Driving to the police station was enough to get the shooters to stop following them. A few days before this incident, 2 17-year-olds were also shot and killed in Oakland, and police are convinced that the 2 incidents are linked, believing that someone on the bus was the target of the shootings. The victim had posted on Instagram that he was on the party bus in a live video. It remains unclear if the police have found any more evidence. Number 4. Stab for a lighter. In July 2021, Jacob Billington was visiting with some friends in Birmingham, Alabama. They decided that they were going to go out for the night. They hit some pubs, drank some beers, and everything was totally fine. It was when Jacob and his friends were walking home when a stranger approached them. The stranger asked Jacob if he had a lighter handy, and when Jacob said he didn't, the man pulled out a knife and stabbed him to death. No one has any idea what the motive for this heinous crime was. According to Jacob's surviving friend Michael Callahan, it was totally random. Michael was also stabbed by the crazed assailant, spending 187 days recovering from his injuries in the hospital. Michael said everything happened so fast that it's hard to really remember. He knows the stranger came out of nowhere and asked him for a lighter. Jacob said they didn't have one, and suddenly there was blood everywhere. Before he could really comprehend what was happening, Jacob was already dead, and he was reaching at the slits in his throat from where he had also been stabbed. Michael severed his carotid artery, his jugular vein, and suffered a stroke in the hospital. The surgeons had to perform an emergency craniectomy, in which part of his skull had to be removed. He was then put into a coma for 3 weeks for medical observation. Michael survived the incident, but the same cannot be said for Jacob. As for the attacker, the police tracked down Zephaniah McLeod, who was taken into custody and later pleaded guilty to manslaughter. He gave no reason for the killing. Number 3. Fatal Fight. 2 women were each sentenced to 6 years in state prison for the fatal beating of 23-year-old Kim Pham outside a Santa Ana nightclub in 2014. Kim and her friends were taking pictures outside of the Crosby when a lady identified as Amelia accidentally bumped into Kim, sparking a verbal fight. 26-year-old Vanessa Zavala and 27-year-old Candace Brito, friends of Amelia, joined the fight and started beating up Kim. They knocked her to the ground and kicked her in the head repeatedly. Portions of the brutal attack were recorded on a cell phone in very poor quality, but it was exhibited in court anyway. Kim suffered brain damage and succumbed to her injuries while battling for her life and was taken off of life support. According to an autopsy, the cause of death was determined to be blunt force injury to the skull. Brito and Zavala were found guilty of manslaughter and assault. Kim Pham's family begged the court to give the 2 girls a maximum penalty of 11 years in jail before the sentencing. It was a simple matter of swallowing their pride and just walking away, but the judge explained that Brito and Zavala were not gang members and happened to be law-abiding citizens until the attack. The judge ordered each of them to pay $5,000 in penalties and a total of $3,500 in funeral fees. Number 2. Birthday Girl. In the year 2020, Wesley Street, a 20-year-old man, was convicted for assaulting, violating, and murdering his childhood friend after what should have been a fun night out. Wesley was hanging out with Keely Bunker celebrating her birthday. They went partying with a few of Keely's friends, including her bestie Monica Riccone. It was a big celebration, with everyone drinking and dancing and having a great time. When the night ended, the group took a taxi back to Monique's house. Wesley was then given the duty of walking Keely safely back to her house, but Keely never made it home. Sometime during the walk, Wesley pulled her into a dark city park, sexually assaulted her, and then murdered her. He left her body and then went back to his own place, where he slept like a baby. According to what was revealed during the court proceedings, Keely had been strangled to death. It's believed that Wesley put her in a chokehold for several minutes. He's since been charged with murder and is facing 29 years in jail. But there's more to the story. Wesley Street had already been busted 3 times prior for sexual assault and illegal sexual activity with a child, and yet he'd never gotten into trouble for these crimes. Nobody knew about his grim past, so he was able to have all these friends who trusted him, not knowing he was a predator. If something had been done sooner, Keely Bunker probably wouldn't have been killed in a park on her birthday. Number 1. Tragic death. It was a normal September evening in 2021 as Sabina Nessa, a 28-year-old primary school teacher, started getting ready for a first date in the local pub in Kidbrooke, a small town in South London. Not far off from her residence is a 5-star hotel in Eastbourne, where 36-year-old Kosi Selamaj, an Albanian delivery driver, was desperately trying to have sex with his estranged wife. Sabina Nessa leaves her flat around 8:30 p.m. excited about her date. Around the same time, Kosi Selamaj went to a local park. It's safe to say that Sabina's expectations about her night were very different from what fate had in store for her. Kosi spotted Sabina walking alone and jumped out of the bushes, then started chasing after her. He then smashed her head 30 times with a 2-foot metal traffic triangle, and poor Sabina fell to the ground unconscious. This deranged sicko sexually assaulted her and hid her body in some trees nearby. He then fled the scene of the crime. Sabina Nessa's body was discovered 24 hours later by a dog walker. News of her murder left the little town of Kidbrooke in shock. After a week-long investigation, the police arrested Kosi Selamaj. He initially denied the murder, but after a few months has pleaded guilty to the crime. Police believe it was a premeditated attack of sexual motivation. The killer's wife admitted that he had tried to strangle her on multiple occasions. She also had no idea in the days leading up to the arrest of her husband that he was being chased by the police. She later explained how she regretted not coming forward before, as it could have prevented an innocent life from being taken.
Number 8. Scuffed shoes. In April 2019, a German bouncer was considered the main subject in the murder of his wealthy British girlfriend. 33-year-old Mark Schutzler once made a living as a bouncer, but when he met the 22-year-old British heiress Anna Reid in Thailand, his financial worries disappeared. Anna had just gotten an around-the-world ticket from her father, Clive, for her 21st birthday present. She'd also inherited a large sum of money after her mother's death. With this, she had all the means to treat Mark right, and that's exactly what she did, as she spent over £50,000 on him in just a few months, paying for lavish hotels, restaurants, and clothes. His life clearly got a massive upgrade after meeting her. He wasn't the man he appeared to be, though. Apparently, not only was he thousands in debt, but he was also unemployed. When her friends caught a whiff of what was going on, they told Anna he was taking advantage of her wealth. While she didn't want to believe them at first, his constant nagging about wanting more money unraveled things pretty quick. Fast forward to April, a few months after they'd met, and Mark was rushing downstairs to their hotel lobby, saying Anna had passed out. Of course, when the paramedics found her in the bathroom, she was already long dead. He claims that she died accidentally while they were having sex and that she asked him to choke her with a towel. But he was obviously not distressed, as someone who just lost their lover should have been. Instead, he even asked investigators to not scuff his expensive shoes while searching the apartment. Not to mention, he'd also hid her credit card so he could use it later. Eventually, Mark's attempts to cover his tracks were revealed, and he was sentenced to 18 years in prison, with the judge on his case calling him a liar and a very dangerous man. Number 7. Ice Cold. In 2006, a grad student in New York was bar hopping with some friends to celebrate her upcoming birthday. By the next morning, she was dead. 24-year-old Emmett St. Gillen was a criminology student at John Jay College. When she went out for a night of drinking and fun, she certainly didn't think it'd end the way it did. During the early hours of February 25, 2006, police got reports of a dead body found in the Brooklyn area. When they arrived, they found Emmett's remains. It was one of the most disturbing murder cases they'd ever recorded. Not only had she been sexually assaulted, but her hands and feet were bound together tightly with zip ties. The case sent police down a rabbit hole of leads that ultimately went nowhere. They asked taxi drivers, barmen, and literally everyone around the area, yet every single suspect was a dead end. Apparently, she decided to stay out longer after her friends had gone home, at which point she was probably wildly drunk. What's more, even the bar's bouncer said he didn't recognize her. Well, at least until they questioned the bar manager, who told the police that he'd asked his bouncer, Daryl Littlejohn, to escort her out after the last call the night of the murder. Now that his lie had been uncovered, Littlejohn did somehow magically remember her, saying her newspaper photograph jogged his memory, though he still insisted that he went the other way after helping her walk out. The investigation, though, concluded otherwise. A small speck of blood found on Emmett's body matched the bouncer's DNA, and they matched some fiber to him as well. The craziest part, Shannon Woodard, a student who was following the case, saw Littlejohn's van and told police he pretended to be law enforcement and tried to kidnap her back in October 2005. Littlejohn's predatory days were finally over, and he was sentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole in July 2009. Number 6. The Veteran. In March 2002, Boston police got a call that someone had been stabbed near a bar. When they got to the scene, they found an ex-Marine suffering from some life-threatening injuries. 23-year-old Daniel Martinez had just finished 4 years of active duty service as a U.S. Marine in 2021 and was finally home to celebrate St. Patrick's Day with his buddies. But what was supposed to be a fun day out turned into a nightmare. He and a friend headed to the Sons of Boston Bar and Grill. For some reason, though, they were denied entry. After exchanging a few words with the bouncer, some of which were likely said in the heat of the moment, the duo turned back and started walking in the other direction. Little did they know they'd awaken a monster. The 38-year-old bouncer, Alvaro Larama, was pursuing them with what looked like to be some kind of object in his hand. Daniel was aware of this and even turned to block Larama's incoming attack. At least that's what he thought he was doing. But the bouncer outsmarted him and struck him on the head with an aluminum beer bottle instead. Alvaro then proceeded to stab Daniel 2 times in the chest before escaping back to the bar, changing his clothes and leaving out the back. And even though Daniel was rushed to the hospital, he didn't quite make it in time. Now, no one really knew Alvaro's true motive. He ended up surrendering himself to the police without much struggle. Having said that, he was charged with murder and will probably spend most of his life behind bars. Number 5. Angry Marine. In April 2021, a U.S. Marine was thrown out of a nightclub for breaking the rules, but instead of accepting his mistake and moving on, he decided to duke it out with a bouncer who was much larger than him. In what could only be described as a David versus Goliath type situation, the U.S. Marine, Glenn Thomason, was adamant about going back into the Monsoons Club. Apparently, after being thrown out, he started yelling insults at the 34-year-old bouncer Hayden Summers. Not to mention, he looked as if he was ready to throw hands. In fact, at one point during the interaction, he said, "I could kill you. I'm a trained killer. I'm a U.S. Marine." The minute he tried taking a swing at the bouncer, though, he received the hardest punch of his life. And while Hayden only called it a 6 out of 10 strike, it knocked him out on the spot. Not to mention, the punch was so brutal that Thomason was forced to have part of his skull removed and spend a long time in the hospital. Of course, Hayden was arrested and found guilty of unlawfully causing serious harm. The bouncer argued that he only acted out of self-defense, though. What do you think? If someone made hand gestures at you and told you they could kill you, would that be enough of a threat to fight? Let us know in the comments below. Number 4. Wartime Pleasures. What would you do if someone told you the world was going to end? Well, one bouncer in war-ridden Crimea thought it would be a good idea to relieve some stress and have sex in front of people. Just 12 hours before a series of explosions were reported nearby at the Saki Air Base, the 32-year-old bouncer was making a few explosions of his own in the bar he worked at. Apparently, things got too rowdy with a nightclub visitor, and he invited her to the top of the bar's counter to strip. One thing led to another, and well, there you have it. They had sex on the center stage while everyone cheered them on and recorded. Not to mention, some very devious customers got very close to the shirtless Garden the brunette, but as she held to the ceiling grate to keep her balance, they went at it for a while too. Public sex is a punishable crime in Russia and can land you 15 days in jail. So as soon as the raunchy video made its way to social media, the police immediately searched for the kinky culprits. Even though the bouncer was caught and put in administrative detention for a few weeks, the female participant remains at large to this very day. Number 3. Overly intoxicated. It's pretty common for bouncers to escort drunk patrons out of bars after hours. In April 2022 though, one Philadelphia bouncer took things too far. 24-year-old Kenneth Fry worked for a private security firm and was appointed at the Taboo Lounge and Sports and City Center. Of course, he'd encountered his fair share of drunk customers during his time. But a 41-year-old patron, Eric Pope, perhaps rubbed him after pushing him out of a property at around 1 a.m. for being overly intoxicated. He then proceeds to punch him. This obviously knocked Eric to the ground, where he laid unconscious for a minute or so before other bouncers moved him from the sidewalk. This was deliberately something wrong though, since Eric didn't even put up a fight after some time passed. Guess what? A few moments later, a crowd formed around him and he was taken to the hospital. The next week, he was pronounced dead. Yep, Kenneth murdered the guy and went on the run from the police. Well, at least for a day. He ended up turning himself in after officials issued a warrant for his arrest. And without any complication, Kenneth Fry was soon charged with third-degree murder. Number 2. No witnesses. In August 2022, a bouncer in Suffolk thought it would be a good idea to cover up the bar's camera before beating a customer. Little did he know, though, that there was another camera recording everything. 31-year-old David Cruz worked as a bouncer at the Tailgaters bar in Holbrook, and while being aggressive came with a job description, he hadn't really done anything too extreme, at least not until 3 a.m. on August 21, when he got into a heated argument with one 32-year-old customer named Jake Scott. In fact, things went south so quickly that Cruz was ready to throw hands, and that's exactly what he did, but not without some precaution. He took off his shirt and threw it at the bar's camera to obscure its view. When that failed, he got up on a chair and covered it properly himself. What he didn't know, though, was that there was another security camera nearby capturing the fight. Regardless, thinking how he was in the clear, Cruz now let his demons take control. As a 6'5" man weighing 270 pounds, his fists packed a hefty punch. There's a reason why he was a bouncer after all. He started wailing on Scott, punching him repeatedly in the head and knocking him out cold. When the poor customer was on the ground motionless, Cruz grabbed him by the shirt and ordered him to get up. When Scott obviously didn't respond, the bouncer delivered a final blow to his head for good measure before leaving the crime scene. The victim was rushed to the hospital in the morning, where he was put in a medically induced coma. Sadly, he'd suffer a brain bleed, a skull fracture, and a traumatic brain injury, all of which led to his death 1 week later. Cruz, on the other hand, surrendered a day after the attack and was indicted for a first-degree manslaughter charge. Number 1. Leave the neck alone. In November 2017, an English bouncer took things too far while escorting a customer out of a nightclub in a chokehold. 25-year-old Karen Spencer was a bouncer at a Bijou nightclub in Bingley, West Yorkshire, and had a tendency to be very brazen at his job sometimes. On a cold November night, though, he turned his aggression up to 11 when he was asked to escort a 24-year-old patron named James Etherington out of the club. He grabbed him by the throat and carried him outside. His basic training handbook literally said, "Whatever you do, leave the neck alone." Still, he held James at a chokehold and walked out as the poor man struggled to breathe. Not to mention, by the time he got outside, the customer was already in a cloudy state of consciousness. Here's the brutal part. Instead of putting him down or shoving him away, Spencer flung him straight at the pavement. Of course, James landed on his head and suffered a traumatic brain injury, which was so bad that he died in the hospital after 10 days. Even though Spencer denied all of the murder charges, he was found guilty of manslaughter and sentenced to 4 years in prison. Still, in spite of the fact that the judge tried to make him fully understand that he was indeed a murderer, saying he was the only one responsible for an innocent man's death, not an ounce of remorse was seen behind Spencer's eyes.
Number 10. Cash Money Murder. In 2021, a young stripper from the UK had an amazing night at work, earning over £8,000 in one shift. Mihaela Sasserman was showered with riches by an extremely wealthy customer. Another dancer at the same club, Gemma Lyons, tried to get some cash out of the client too, but was turned away. This sparked jealousy and rage. Later that night around 3 a.m., Gemma and her boyfriend, Nicholas Proctor, decided to rob Mihaela. After work, Proctor waited outside of the club in a van. He then followed the victim as she left, and when she stopped to have a cigarette, he attacked her, hitting her in the head while he tried to grab the money. Mihaela was left bruised with a nasty cut on the side of her head. When authorities arrested the couple, Gemma sobbed, either remorseful for her crime or sad that she got caught. Proctor was given 5 years in jail for the assault and robbery, while his girlfriend was only given 2. Number 9. Wrong address. In December 2020, a 26-year-old man was almost shot to death after he showed up to the address he thought he was sent, ready to work. Steve Macon made a living as an exotic dancer. He was hired by a group of 12 women to come to a bachelorette party and give them a show. Sadly for Steve, he read the address wrong. Instead of going to Altrace Court like he was supposed to, the man showed up at Altrace Lane. After knocking on the door, a young woman greeted him, and at the time, Macon was dressed in the full stripper policeman getup. His costume must have been pretty convincing too, because just a few seconds after the door was opened, several men rushed to the door with guns and started firing. These suspects were apparently gang members who panicked after seeing a cop show up to their door. Wilma Johnson, a nearby neighbor, witnessed the whole thing. Despite seeing the crime unfold before her, Wilma didn't call the authorities because she believed Macon was an actual cop too. She figured he had things under control as he desperately ran away from the bullets flying towards him. After running for nearly 2 miles or just about 3 kilometers, Steve finally thought he was far enough away and called for help. Paramedics found him unconscious in a parking lot with 5 gunshot wounds. Luckily, Macon will survive, but he'll likely be traumatized for the rest of his life. Number 8. Love Triangle. In April 2018, the body of 29-year-old Bo White was found in his West Virginia home, but not all of Bo was there. His head was discovered near the property in a secluded forested area. During his life, Bo and his father James knew a woman named Rowena Cheryl Mills. James and Mills had been involved sexually for many years. Mills earned money as a stripper working at a local club. But here's the kicker. It's believed that Bo and Mills also had a similar relationship. The young man was mainly a shut-in who liked staying at home and keeping to himself. He didn't have a job and got money from disability pensions. Investigators think that Mills may have been offering Bo sexual favors in exchange for his prescription medication. The 43-year-old woman was a known drug addict. This fact was even used as an argument by her own lawyer. She's the primary suspect in Bo's murder case because the last night of his life, Mills texted Bo and asked if he wanted to meet up. This was on March 31st, the day before his body was discovered. Authorities claim that she beat the man to death, then used a knife to separate his head. A court witness even testified under oath that Mills asked to borrow a chainsaw, but refused her. After the killing, she dug through Bo's pockets, took his money and medicine, then texted the same friend simply saying, "Let's party." Her vehicle was even in the victim's driveway after the murder. Despite all the evidence, Mills' defense claimed that Bo's father was the one who killed him. They made the argument that James grew jealous over the growing connection between his son and Rowena and couldn't take it. Thankfully, the judge and jury didn't buy it. Rowena Mills was found guilty of first-degree murder and was sentenced to life in prison without parole. Number 7. DREAMBOYS Nightmare. Whether you love them or hate them, strip clubs have remained a staple activity for countless bachelor and birthday celebrations. But one 21st birthday party involving male strippers didn't go over very well in 2017. 8 women celebrating their friend's big day decided to visit the Tiger Club in Manchester. One of the most popular shows the establishment has to offer is DREAMBOYS, which the girls were looking forward to seeing. It features several male strippers. One of them was Tyson Cross. After his performance, the women claim that Tyson came up to talk to them while they were at the bar. They say he was flirting, but it quickly turned aggressive. Once the girls told him repeatedly that they were all spoken for and in happy relationships, his anger only grew. Multiple people tried to calm Tyson down, but he just pushed one of the women out of the way. Others stepped in to try and help their friend, but they were targeted as well. Police were eventually called, and Cross was immediately fired from his job. Some of the young women reported facial injuries, with one even having cut on her eye after the fight. What was supposed to be a fun night out with friends quickly turned into one of the worst birthdays ever. And now for number 6, but first, we want to give a shout out to FaZe Beast and Cindy Livesy. Thanks so much for watching and supporting the channel. If you're new here, be sure to subscribe and join the Bad Badger family. Number 6, Obsession. Abigail Saldana worked as a stripper at Rick's Cabaret in Fort Worth, Texas. One of the young women's regular clients was 54-year-old Stanley Saliga. On October 26, 2021, witnesses described seeing a vehicle full of bullet holes drive off of a highway exit ramp and onto a patch of grass near the airport. Once authorities got to the scene, they determined that the driver of the car, Abigail, was dead. Suspiciously, just hours before her death, Stanley made a post on Instagram. He claimed that he would report the young woman for prostitution after paying her $3,000. Stanley labeled himself as a victim, saying Abigail lied to him and told them they had a future together. The two had supposedly been seeing each other since July 2021, and while Abigail believed it was just a transactional work relationship, Stanley obviously thought it was more. But the story gets more interesting. Another social media post made by Abigail revealed that she had found a tracking device in her car and believed it belonged to Stanley. She also claimed that he had been constantly harassing her. A traffic camera nearby Abigail's house captured a red truck belonging to Stanley following her vehicle and passing by her home multiple times. After the killing, a SWAT team was sent to the suspect's home where they found him with multiple self-inflicted wounds. Stanley is now being held in prison awaiting trial on $250,000 bond. Number 5, Killing the Boss. Police originally thought the death of James Mulrennan was self-inflicted, but after more digging, they realized what actually happened. In December 2016, James fell 5 stories out of his apartment balcony and died later on in the hospital. It seemed fairly simple. He jumped and maybe even fell until investigators saw his home. Almost every corner was covered by splotches of blood. Duct tape and zip ties were also found at the scene. For work, James was the manager of the Dollhouse, a strip club in Orlando, Florida. One of his employees was 24-year-old Mandy Mae Jackson. Mandy Mae and her boyfriend Scott Michael Love were spotted on his apartment's security cameras. The footage also shows the couple running to a vehicle 1 minute after a 911 call reported the fall from the balcony. Apparently, the suspect shot at the victim, hitting him in the leg before he jumped off the balcony. They also robbed him and used his credit card at Walmart just 2 hours later. For her crimes, the former exotic dancer Mandy Mae Jackson is now serving life in prison. Number 4, Good Samaritan. On August 1st, 2017, Ralph Cross was murdered. After stopping on the side of the road to help 4 women, he was shot in the back. The women included Brittany Curry, Ponesha Taylor, Letitia Dotson, and Jonisha Simmons. All of them worked as exotic dancers in Tennessee to earn money. Cross was just trying to do the right thing and help the women out. They apparently had a flat tire and he went out of his way for them, buying a new tire for the girls and even some food. After this, he brought them all to his home so they could stay the night. A witness reported seeing Ralph early the next morning arguing with some of the girls. All of a sudden, a loud noise went off and 3 of the women ran out of Ralph's home towards the 4th girl who was sitting in a car in the front of the property. Police were called to the scene and they discovered Cross's dead body with a bullet wound in his back. Inside Cross's home, couch cushions were turned over and inside some of his pants pockets were turned out. A thorough investigation yielded some fingerprints that traced back to Letitia Dotson. Eventually, photos of all 4 women were circulating news programs as cops tried to apprehend them. The girls' families were able to convince them all to turn themselves in, and according to the last information released on the case, the women are all in custody awaiting sentences for the murder of Ralph Cross, a tragic Good Samaritan. Number 3, Club SKINN. Have you ever had a rival? Someone who has just always gotten under your skin no matter what they do? Well, Renita Linnell Lowell from Portland sure has. She knew Shanita Turner since they were kids, but something on June 15, 2016 pushed Lowe past her breaking point. Witnesses say that the 2 women were arguing one night when things suddenly got physical. It's unclear what exactly they were so angry over, but it is clear that Lowe punched Turner in the face. Even with a bouncer doing his best to get them away from each other, Lowe managed to stab her childhood rival 3 times with a knife she had kept hidden in her purse. 23-year-old Renita worked as an exotic dancer at Tommy 2's strip club. She apparently came to the murder scene, Club SKINN, after her shift was over. While being interviewed by authorities, Lowe claimed that 29-year-old Turner was the one who started the fight. And on security footage, it does show that the victim did actually choke Lowe at one point, but the outcome of the fight remains the same. Renita's lawyer made the argument that Turner had a violent past, but eventually their client admitted to the crime. She was sentenced to 15 years in prison for the murder of Shantina Turner. Number 2. Hustlers. In 2019, the hit movie Hustlers came out, starring award-winning actors like Jennifer Lopez, Constance Wu, and more. The film centered on the true life story of Rosalind Keough and several other exotic dancers she worked with while they scammed hundreds of thousands of dollars out of unsuspecting men. After their targets visited the clubs the women worked at, Rosalind and her group would give them a simple cocktail, infused with drugs like ketamine and MDMA. The drink would keep the men extremely happy, dazed, confused, and most importantly, it would make it difficult for them to remember what happened. Once they were drugged up, the girls would run up massive expenses and bills using the men's credit cards. For quite a while, the scheme worked, and it paid off big time, until of course it didn't, and they were caught. Usually the women picked out their targets very carefully, only focusing on wealthy people who had a lot to lose if news of them being at a strip club were to get out. They banked on the fact that these men likely wouldn't go public, saying that they were scammed while out on town doing things they probably shouldn't have been doing. One victim named Dr. Zayed Kevarkas Yunin didn't fall for it though. After one of the girls scammed him out of $135,000, he told his story, and soon enough other men came forward along with criminal charges against the suspects. Rosalind got off relatively easy. By pleading guilty to her crimes, she avoided any prison time. Keough later went on to write a book about her story. Number 1. Dallas Cabaret. Earlier this year in June, a 32-year-old mother of 3 named Shalonda Anderson was shot to death outside of a popular strip club, XTC Cabaret Dallas. The business later released surveillance footage of the incident. Anderson allegedly drove her car into a group of security guards and pinned a 26-year-old female security guard between her car and another vehicle. Police and the club said the security guard shot Anderson and a second guard also fired, but missed. The same night, her and some of her friends were asked to leave the businesses after an argument broke out. Anderson was upset over the change she was given after closing out her tab. Some friends that night claimed the security guards were pushing them out the door. XTC Cabaret released a statement to the public offering condolences to those involved in the incident. They even offered to pay for the mother's funeral. But friends and family members of Anderson believe there's more to the story. One of the guards who fired shots at Shalonda have been arrested, but information on the case continues to be released as investigations continue. Thanks for watching. Have you ever been to a strip club? Let us know in the comments below, and be sure to subscribe to see more awesome videos from Bad Badger. We'll see you next time.